The Sino-Indian War occurred in October-November 1962 over disputed Himalayan borders. The conflict was indeed one-sided in many areas, with China's People's Liberation Army, PLA, achieving rapid victories. China captured several thousand Indian soldiers during the war. This figure aligns with historical records of around 3,000 to 4,000 POWs. However, exact numbers and the duration of captivity remain debated. Brigadier John Dalvi, commander of the Indian 7th Infantry Brigade, was captured by the PLA. He later wrote a memoir titled Himalayan Blunder, where he detailed India's military failures. In 1962, a war broke out between China and India, and the process of this war was almost one-sided, and the Indian army had no room for resistance. The text contains kernels of truth about the 1962 war and Brigadier Dalvi's capture. At 7:30 in the morning of October 20th, with the sound of cannon, the battle started. More than 190 artillery pieces of Chinese army launched a 15-minute artillery attack on the 7th Infantry Brigade of the Indian Army, and the Indian Army was beaten to a pulp, Chinese historians said. Before they could react, Chinese army had already rushed to the high ground. The Indian Army was quickly defeated and began to run south desperately. Even the commander of the 7th Infantry Brigade, Dalvi, was running away when he found that he could not contact the rear. When he could not get help and could not get in touch with the battalions and companies, he decisively decided to retreat. At first, he tried to organize some troops to evacuate, but the retreat soon turned into a rout, and Dalvi was powerless to do anything about it. Dalvi was surprised to find that the troops that originally belonged to the rear were also fleeing southward on the way of escape. When he fled to Zhongzhou, he found that it had been occupied by the Chinese army, and the People's Liberation Army had actually run ahead of them. Dalvi decided to change direction and continue to escape over mountains and ridges. However, just when he thought he had successfully escaped the encirclement of the People's Liberation Army, the People's Liberation Army actually rushed to the rear of Dalvi and his party. In the end, Dalvi and his party had no choice but to surrender. Dalvi's party of 9 people, all of whom were officers, was considered a big catch for the People's Liberation Army. After the war, Dalvi was captured as a group of people with the 82 Mortar of the 154th Regiment, and the 2nd Company also received the collective 3rd-class merit. However, when Chinese army captured Dalvi, they did not actually recognize his identity, because Dalvi did not wear a military rank. When Chinese soldiers passed by him, he saluted Chinese soldiers, Chinese historians said. It was not until Chinese English translator asked about the other party's identity that Dalvi revealed his identity. The process was quite interesting. The translator asked Dalvi about his identity in English, but Dalvi answered in French, which made him look very noble. Then the two of them continued to communicate, one in English and the other in French. Until the end, Chinese translator thanked Dalvi in standard French. Dalvi suddenly felt embarrassed because Dalvi's French had a serious Indian accent, but the French of Chinese translator sounded like a Frenchman. After the translator reported the news, the director of the political department, Vic, still didn't believe that Dalvi was a genuine brigade commander and insisted on meeting him in person. Vic asked him how to prove his identity as a brigade commander. Dalvi said he couldn't prove that he didn't have a military rank, and he could only show a kind of photo ID called Wei Ku in Chinese language with General Korzong. However, another Indian company commander who was captured soon came forward to testify. Vic asked Dalvi again, why did he admit his identity so readily? Dalvi said in surprise that this was a rule. The Indian Army was born out of the British Army, so it was more concerned with the rules of engagement. Chinese army had only fought with the Japanese and the Nationalist Army before, so Wei Ku used the Japanese to trap the Indian Army. Then Wei Ku asked Dalvi if he had any trouble. Dalvi said that the Chinese army was a civilized army, but he wanted to smoke, and finally the chief of staff brought him 2 packs of cigarettes and found canned milk. After getting comfortable, Dalvi sighed and said, it was wiped out a brigade within 24 hours, which is rare in the world. After defeating the 7th Infantry Brigade, Chinese army also captured 3,942 prisoners within 32 days. Later, Dalvi and others also visited the mainland. After returning home, they wrote a memoir, the Himalayan poetry book, and warned their descendants never to fight the Chinese again. If you are looking for a more objective understanding of the Sino-Indian War of 1962, relying on academic sources or first-hand memoirs like Himalayan Blunder is recommended. Himalayan Blunder is a highly regarded memoir written by Brigadier John Dalvi, who served as the commander of the Indian 7th Infantry Brigade during the 1962 Sino-Indian War. This book offers a detailed insider's perspective on the strategic and operational failures that led to India's defeat in the war. Key points about the memoir. 1. Personal account startled Smiley. The book is a first-hand narrative of Brigadier Dalvi's experiences before, during, and after the war. It covers his tenure in the high-altitude regions of the Himalayas and his eventual capture by the People's Liberation Army, PLA. Point 2. Critical analysis of leadership startled Smiley. Dalvi is sharply critical of India's political and military leadership at the time. He blames the lack of preparedness, strategic miscalculations, and poor coordination for India's humiliating defeat. He discusses the government's overconfidence and its failure to anticipate China's military capabilities and resolve. Point 3. Military lessons startled Smiley. Dalvi outlines the operational challenges faced by Indian troops, including inadequate equipment, insufficient training for high-altitude warfare, and logistical issues. He highlights the disparity in resources between the Indian and Chinese armies, particularly in terms of mobility, firepower, and support infrastructure. Point 4. Emphasis on the forward policy. The book criticizes India's forward policy, which involved the establishment of outposts in disputed territories without adequate military support. Dalvi describes this policy as provocative and ill-conceived, leading to clashes with the PLA. Point 5. Capture and reflections startled Smiley. Dalvi recounts his capture by Chinese forces and his subsequent treatment as a prisoner of war. He provides a sobering reflection on the consequences of poor planning and leadership in a military campaign. Impact and reception. Himalayan Blunder is considered a seminal work on the Sino-Indian War. It was one of the first detailed accounts to publicly critique the Indian government's handling of the conflict. The book sparked widespread debate about civil-military relations in India, defense policy, and the importance of strategic foresight. Legacy. Even decades after its publication, Himalayan Blunder remains a must-read for military historians, strategists, and anyone interested in understanding the complexities of the Sino-Indian War. It serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of ignoring ground realities, overestimating one's capabilities, and underestimating an adversary. Dalvi's candid and often painful account of the events provides a crucial lesson in humility and preparedness for both military professionals and policymakers.